and that's, I don't think that's the full definition of logics of difference with respect to countering logics of equivalence, but both of them are incompatible but necessary to construct the social. The social being the sort of the locus of the irreducible tension between them. And I guess what he's sort of talking about there is just society can't just be a totality, like say a totality of equivalence, because there's no capacity to move, to feel different. It's impossible. We've covered this before. So if it's declared, it's doing so at the cost of excluding people, and if it's declared, it'll suppress those people. Whereas a total logic of difference, a society defined by a logic of difference, is just, I assume, just chaos, totally atomized, bouncing off the walls, nothing. So where we come together as a society is in the tension between these two forces in society, I guess, or in humanity, maybe. So we select an identity to represent this impossible totality. I think this is really important in terms of the distinction of the other, at least the first two chats that we were having, in discussing the possibility of having a universal subject. And I think you actually said it in the chat with Stephen really well. I think it might have been the first time it came up. Making a distinction between having a universal subject as the ends and a universal subject as the means of a movement, where a universal subject as an ends is like, this is the political outcome we want. We want a society that is different to now, but ultimately closed, sutured. We want to get rid of now and institute a new closed system. And this is what it's going to look like, which is obviously incredibly authoritarian, and an impossibility. And like I said, that will lead to exclusion and therefore suppression. The adverse to that is a universal subject as a means to creating a new society is entirely different, because in an organic network of identifications that leads towards the system of signification, the grammar that we're talking about, there's an energy that can be generated. I think Zizek made that point, in that identification, in discovering commonalities, in discovering that, like, a wider world of identification, that's quite energizing, and I suppose instills kind of a lot of hope, or can instill a lot of hope in people, and go, oh no, fuck, this is something we can do. So like having a universal subject in terms of taking down a current system or society is totally different to designing the institution that arrives after that society. So in a populist one, sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, I guess it's just that, I guess it's probably either an echo or just a compliment to the point. I guess, I mean, within the concept of it being a means of, rather than an end goal. I guess you sorry, I'll have to cut out the audio when my stomach is growling.
Can't hear it.
Oh, okay, that's good then. So no, I guess as a means, I guess to me would also insinuate, the process, a movement, a certain sort of forward momentum. But if you're not putting a fixed point with a set of criteria that you're working, I mean, you are working towards certain commonalities, but not necessarily like a constituting, like, end goal, I guess, sense of being. It's a case of like, more like, as we said, like in a sort of centralized establishment that you're working towards. I guess in that moving forward, I see the potential for, a universal subject that also allows that is has the potential to, I guess, um, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess it has that potential that Muff was looking for. Maybe even, I guess, with her concepts of, like, the radical invigoration of democracy. This idea that, like, the plurality is it is important, and it's, we need not let go of that idea of nest of personal difference, but it's that being able to, I guess, articulate, as that kind of idea of a universal subject, or in those sort of lava lamp ways that we explain the kind of
Yeah.
temporal kind of comings together. So that momentum I see as being something where there is the potential for that plurality to also work within the universal subject, I guess. Just because, again, I would feel that if you're moving towards something, it allows for the opposite. I would feel that pockets of stagnation or fragmentation could form along the way, so to speak.
This is exactly where the left is today, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
it is. We are currently under a heavy, widespread negotiation regarding um, how centralized and how dispersed we ought to be as a movement. Um, the autonomy of the particularities it seems can go to the extreme of being returning organically to very localized ghettoizations, where they're just self-excluding uh, on whatever very small particular identification um, they're possessed, that's driving them,
Mm.
to the cost of basically the political. And this is the argument, to the cost of recognizing the possibility of working with anyone else. It's as if, and obviously we're talking about fringes here, but it's in the discourse. It is part of the conversation. But on these fringes, there does seem to be subject positions that are so specialized in terms of their identity that, because I suppose what constitutes that identity is an absolute um, carving away of everything else to sort of form that identity. Whereas I suppose, an identity could have been formed 100 years ago around a singular issue, like suffragettes. Their identity was, well, okay, yes, so we're women, but as women, we don't have suffrage. We don't have access to the franchise, and we want that. That's our demand, and we identify with that, and we're passionate about it, and we are now a political movement for that.
Mm.
Whereas I think now there does exist the phenomenon where identities are so clean shaven that every single frontier possible has been very clearly defined, and
Mm-hmm.
it, if they were to link to a movement, they would have to blur the lines of that identity. And I wonder, is there an anxiety? Because I don't know, did we speak online or in person before about the sort of how identity can must be linked to sort of the death drive, or not the death drive, but like the anxiety of death. Um, to be eradicated, if I lower my value here on this frontier in order to work with that other identity there, do I become less of myself? I think that's the sort of
Yeah.
the there's a hyper dimension to sort of current identity formations. And so it's impossible at that level to be political, because to be political, regardless of populism or any greater movement at all, to be political is to sort of is to take one clear frontier and
Mm.
sort of start attacking that.